a hell of a project, which includes not only information people have never seen, video clips that they've never seen, but it's going to build an elaborate, detailed case of the Kennedy murder, so they understand who did it and most likely how it was conducted and carried out.
So do you focus more on the who and the how, or do you go much into the why he was actually assassinated?
Well, we're going to have the release that will be online will be a shorter version, but the longer version is going to run up to 4, maybe even 5 hours. It'll be 2 discs.
Wow!
Because there's so much information to cover. It's not even funny. Matt's going to be releasing a book which will explore all the information collectively. So, if people really want to get a wealth of knowledge, the book will be it. But this is going to be like this is the one investigation. And when I say that, I mean we've read every book. We've collected well over 200 books, and we're reading them all, tabbing them, every point to be made, exploring it. This is the first Kennedy project, unlike any before, that has explored every book, debunker books, CIA books, Castro books, Bay of Pigs books, Kennedy years, you name it. We've done every single book, and we're documenting and getting every point to make, and we're rating it to see what's important. No project has attempted to do that. So this is going to be the definitive, official disclosure. And what's great about it is it has the most up-to-date declassified released information, and it's going to be right in time for the 50th anniversary of the death, which is 2013.
So do you think that there was the single shooter, or do you believe the magic bullet theory, or do you believe that there were multiple shooters?
Well,
from your reading and research so far,
more than half the witnesses in Dealey Plaza not only saw a shooter, but heard the shots. I mean, when you look back at the actual interviews with the witnesses, which not only as their testimony was withheld from the Warren Commission report, it was documented in the notes, but it wasn't necessarily in the Warren Commission report. But they were interviewed. These video clips, a lot of people have never seen. We've obtained these videos. Mark Lane did an excellent job.
So are these back from the 60s? They're that old?
Oh, yeah. All black and white. Beautiful, high quality. And what's fascinating is almost every clip they go, well, I saw the shooter, and he was over there on the picket fence. And you hear them say, you go, what? Wait a second. Not only was testimony withheld from the Warren Commission, almost half the witnesses at the Dealey Plaza ran to the person they thought was the shooter. It's going to blow people's minds away. The level of cover-up that happened is phenomenal. You know, I interviewed Dick Gregory, who had stolen the Zapruder film from Time Life and aired it on Geraldo Rivera's show in the 70s. It was the first time the public ever saw the Zapruder film, right? Well, Dick Gregory, who's just an incredible man, it was really great to meet him. I also interviewed Peter Dale Scott and a few others. Really explained to me that it was easier to control the information. What people don't understand now, my generation looks back on Kennedy and we're like, oh, it all came out. It's like the same thing with 9/11. Oh, they've debunked it. You have to understand there's a timeline of things. The people had the Warren Commission, and that was it. Jim Garrison's trial was barely covered, and it wasn't until the 70s that we even saw the Zapruder film. So nobody really knew anything. People were falling dead in the 60s. Nothing was being reported. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s when we really got to look at this information. And now, of course, it's widely available. And like with 9/11, originally, there was never any disclosure of Building 7. Not once. Nobody said anything.
And I'm a pretty astute guy, and I think that I follow as much as I can TV, and I read alternative informed media, and I've always been like a news junkie. And even myself, when it came to 9/11, I didn't hear about WT7 until the 40-story building that collapsed that wasn't hit by a plane. They also was pulled like later in the afternoon on 9/11. I didn't hear about that till years after the fact.
Yeah, it was an adamant cover-up. Clips were taken out. They were tampered with. Nobody talked about it, and it was a media cover-up, and nobody addressed it. It was never addressed in the commission report or anything like that. The official stories were, we don't know why that fell. So people have to understand there's a timeline. That fueled the conspiracy theories, the inability to address people's concerns. Then, because the 9/11 intelligence inquiry wasn't good enough, and it was the family members, not Alex Jones, it was the family members who got together, the widows, who demanded another investigation, and it was because they went to the media, because Bush prevented it. They got coverage, and then we had the 9/11 Commission report, which was a whole mess up, tons of stuff redacted and blacked out, and that still didn't address more than 3/4 of their questions. And that's when we started to kind of get some addressing to Building 7. But even then, debunkers and people who give me debunking, oh, Building 7's been addressed. Oh, wait a second. It was not addressed for 7 years. There was never, ever, not once, one article, disclosure, investigation, nothing. And then all of a sudden, after people started bringing it up, then they act like, oh, but that was disclosed and investigated. No, it wasn't. Never was. So these popular mechanics, Jim Miggs, these guys come out and act like this was fully disclosed. No, it never was, ever. It's not in the commission report. The official investigations ignored it, and it was against the rules of the networks to even show the clip for 5 years. They weren't allowed to show the clip. It was that behavior, that kind of mentality, that cover-up attitude, that caused people to believe in the conspiracy because the way they addressed it initially. Well, this timeline has to be understood.
Well, that's the thing. So even if there is no concern, say 9/11 is as the official report. Let's just, for the hypothetically, all right, say everything the government told us about 9/11 was 100% factual. Their behavior after 9/11 and not addressing people's legitimate concerns, not just dismissing people, feel that they brought this on themselves.
Right, and the failure to address questions. There's so much that's not answered. I've read the commission report. I've also read the intelligence inquiry. How come nobody was charged for lying? The differences between the 9/11 intelligence inquiry, which had Nancy Pelosi and all these people on it, okay? The difference between that and Thomas Keene's 9/11 commission is like night and day. Completely two different stories. How come nobody's talking about the government told us one story and then a different story completely different? That doesn't raise suspicions that they have two different... in the rule of thumb, when a cop asks you one story and then 2 weeks later he asks you a story and it's a different story, they think you're lying. That's the rule of thumb.
Right.
You don't have consistency.
Inconsistent. Because remember, generally if you have a solidified memory, you're going to remember it the same way every time. When you're trying to fabricate something, if you're not good at fabrications, you might forget what you said or miss the detail, or there may be an inconsistency with a detail versus another part of your story or timeline. And so I always tell people, I don't know what happened in 9/11. I say I have questions. There's things that don't make sense, but what I do know about 9/11 is that the official reports don't make sense.
Right. And they don't address 90% of the questions.
And they don't address a lot of the questions. And I used to work in the intelligence industry, or defense industry, I should say, in the aviation side of things. I was in the military. I'm a preparedness geek. So I understand how government works in a lot of ways. But I do know that if a plane loses contact, I do know for a fact when a plane loses contact, like that golfer a couple of years earlier before 9/11, Payne Stewart, they had F-16 escorts up following that aircraft within minutes.
The interception is standard protocol.
That's standard protocol and been that way for a long time. The two questions and things that I don't get about 9/11 is why weren't the 3 or 4 planes all intercepted, especially when they're heading toward the East Coast? That doesn't make sense to me. And
how come there were no hijacking alerts?
Well,
the pilots never sent out codes, which is standard protocol.
And WTC7 doesn't make sense to me. Now, I'm not saying
the ultimate weird thing about those interceptions.
Right.
Not only were they not set, but put yourself on 9/11. A plane's hit Tower 1. A plane's hit Tower 2. You have 2 other planes not responding, turned around on their course. 45 minutes. They're heading towards Washington, D.C. Not one plane is intercepted. You want to talk about a story people have a hard time believing? What, does the government just fall asleep? It's one thing to ignore the first 2, but after 2 planes hit 2 buildings, and 2 planes are not responding, heading towards Washington.
Yeah, I know a lot of people in the Air Force. I know a lot of people that have worked at Northcom and other places, and I can't get straight answers out of these things. They say I'm not going to talk about it. That's the common response I get from people, but what they have told me in the past is that to believe the official story means that every government agency dealing with security fell down on the job that day. Whether it's the FAA, Northcom, Air Force, you name it, even the Secret Service, all fell down on the job all at the same time. And that doesn't make sense to me because I have more faith in my government than that. I have more faith in the capabilities of people that are tasked with defending our nation. And to believe the official story basically says they all screwed up. and if they all screwed up, then, Jonathan, tell me if I'm wrong, shouldn't there have been some trials maybe some people fired for
the regular way it should have been dealt with. After 9/11, of course, there was a massive amount of prior knowledge that I cover in my film series, but all that prior knowledge should have been exposed, and then they should have reformed and restructured government. That's what normally happens. All the prior knowledge would have said, okay, we had this, what do we have to do to change it? We don't have to get rid of the Constitution. We go through and figure out why